Well, hello and welcome to Nevada Trails. I'm Jeff Cowan, Community Liaison with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. And Michael Smith and the crew here have given TRPA the show today to bring you another Lake Tahoe update. I've got the opportunity to talk with TRPA's Planning Director, John Hester, mostly about the regional plan update. So the Lake Tahoe Regional Plan is being updated this year. And John, welcome to Nevada Trails.
Glad to be here.
Thanks
for having me.
Yeah, so the draft regional plan update's finally been released on April of this year. The agency, I know, has put out a lot of documents. But to start with, what is the regional plan, and really why does it need to be updated?
Sure. Well, quite simply, and it's not really that complicated, is the regional plan has some components. One of them is the goals and policies, and those need to be updated because the last plan was done roughly 25 years ago, and lots of things have changed. Also associated with that, we update our code, our regulations that we use to review development and that we work with the local governments on. And we also have, as part of the update process, what's called an environmental impact statement, where we look at alternatives to the plan and some alternatives to make sure we identify and mitigate any impacts. So that's the package, and that's what's going forward.
Okay, I get it. So now, thresholds, the environmental threshold carrying capacities, I think they're a part of that sort of list of documents, but also didn't TRPA just put out a report on the environmental threshold?
They did, and let me give the viewers a little bit of background. When the bi-state compact that created TRPA said that the first thing that the agency needed to do was create environmental carrying capacity thresholds. That's how much of certain things could be allowed and still maintain the environment at the lake. So those are called the thresholds, and then we do a threshold evaluation every so often. In this case, we're looking at doing it every 4 years as we go into the future. And it evaluates how we're doing in terms of maintaining or attaining those thresholds. This year, for the first time, we had a peer review of scientists, independent from TRPA, take a look at all of the work we had done, all of the information we had, and our conclusions, and they gave us a pretty good review on what we did.
Good. So the report was well established. What were some of the findings? Like how's Lake Tahoe doing?
Lake Tahoe is doing very well in most areas. I think 63%, if I remember the number right, of our thresholds we've either attained or we're improving. There's a couple areas that, and most people will know this intuitively, noise. And part of the reason that noise is hard to attain is because we've set the threshold that any one event that exceeds our noise level causes us to not attain that threshold.
Oh.
So we can actually look at that threshold and maybe change it if that doesn't make sense.
Right.
That's one of the things the peer review group said is maybe this isn't really a realistic or the right threshold.
It's like every plane that flies overhead.
If one plane flies over and it's too loud in a year, then we haven't met the threshold.
I see. Okay.
It may not be realistic to keep that threshold in exactly that form. The other one, which most people will know, is that the lake isn't as clear as everybody would like it to be. At one point, there was 120 feet of depth that you could see what's called a Secchi dish, which is a white plate-sized dish that they drop into the water.
Got it. Yeah.
That for a while the depth got declined, so you couldn't see it as far down, and now it's sort of leveled off. What we're hoping for is that the trend gets to where you can start seeing it deeper and deeper. Yeah. That we need some work on, and they also talked about that we might need to establish a new threshold for near shore, close to the shore, because of algae growth and things like that. So the water quality and those aspects we do need to keep working on.
Right. Okay. So, but there were some areas there were areas of concern, but overall doing a little bit better. Now, right. So the regional plan update. I mean, the policies you guys are updating, that's being informed by this threshold evaluation report. So what is the regional plan update going to focus on?
Well, again, going back to our compact that established us, it says once we've got these thresholds, the real purpose of the regional plan is to lay out what we need to do to maintain and attain those. So the regional plan update is informed by the same information we just talked about. So water quality, what can we do to improve water quality? That's one of the major things that the new regional plan policies and goals talk about. And so what we're talking about there is, for example, we have what we call stream environment zones, and we have areas where water naturally coming out of the mountains going into the lake might sit in a marsh, and the pollutants and the sediment drop out of that before it goes into the lake and the lake's clear. well, where those stream environment zones have had development, and that's usually 40, 50 years old before TRPA was formed, where we have that, we're trying to figure out a way to move that development out of those areas. So that's one of the big objectives, big directions that's in the regional plan, is restoring these environmentally sensitive areas. And
so actually taking like buildings, homes, maybe even businesses sometimes, and I mean, does the plan just say sort of tear them down? I mean, how does it work on the ground?
Well, what we intend to do is, first of all, people own those, so they have a value there and a property right. So what we are doing is we are trying to figure out, and we think we have, and our analysis shows that it would work, is you can move one of those, sell it to somebody or move it yourself into an area, a target area where we do want development. And if you get a really sensitive area that's really distant and really will give us a good impact, we will give you a bonus. So you can move one unit and get 2 or 3. And the target areas we want to move it to, again, no surprise, is the areas where we are going to have more development concentrated. And we'd like to see those, especially where the development is 40, 50 years old and it was done under old technology, if you will, for water quality, old infrastructure. We'd like to see that redeveloped so that the urban runoff into the lake is also improved. So we're looking at it like, if we can get these remote areas out of these remote development out of these environmentally sensitive areas, moved into the more developed areas and clean up those and redevelop those developed areas at the same time, we're going to get a double benefit.
Right.
And we think that's really going to help with the water quality, the one major area that our threshold report shows we need to improve in. So back all the way to the compact and the purpose of TRPA, we set the thresholds, we do a plan to attain those thresholds, and we adjust that plan, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Okay, so that's what the plan update's about, and that's a really interesting focus. I mean, I know that walkability of town centers and sort of having pedestrian access safer for a lot of people was one of the things that the public told TRPA a few years ago that they wanted to as an outcome of the regional plan update. So I mean, I think I've heard a lot of people say it's interesting that what we need for restoration can actually be balanced or leveraged by what we need in our town centers, you know, the same kind of improvements and upgrades that we need there.
Exactly. So as we move that development into the more developed areas and want them to redevelop, we're also talking about making it less auto-dependent. So it's like you said, walkable. There's more sidewalks. There's bike trails. There's different, what we planners call land uses. So you have mixed uses. So you can walk to a nearby grocery store or maybe work and live in the same building or nearby buildings. So people don't have to drive all over the basin to do something. You don't have to get in your car to go to the store. You could walk. That, by the way, is something that with the demographic shifts going on across the whole country that we're seeing that happen in a lot of places where people who no longer have children at home don't want a single family house with a yard they have to mow and a play set. They would rather live someplace where they can spend their leisure time on a hike or playing golf or out on the lake or something like that instead of mowing the yard.
Right, okay.
And mowing and having yards that you mow up at Lake Tahoe isn't environmentally that good anyway.
Sure. Fertilizer, water, all those things you need for that soil.
Exactly. Now that doesn't mean that everybody who has a single family house, we're going to take those away. It's only in targeted environmentally sensitive areas that we're trying to move those houses away.
And even if, I mean, if you were to make, you know, the plan were to play out, like how big of an impact would it have on the residential areas? Wasn't it kind of a small percentage that was actually going to change?
It's a very small number. There are about 4,100 development rights that are out there that could be turned into houses.
Out of like 50,000 parcels, right?
Yeah, there's 50 some odd thousand parcels. Okay. Between the last plan and this plan, there were 18,000. That number was 18,000. It's gone down now to 4,000. Okay. About 10,000 of those were purchased. So you have by public entities like the California Tahoe Conservancy and the Nevada Division of State Lands. So they, and the Forest Service, they have these development rights that they're holding out of the system so that land doesn't develop. And so what we've got is actually, we've had a lot of success since the last plan in reducing the potential development footprint, but now we've got about 4,100 left. You can't use those 4,100 unless you get what we call an allocation. And I know this is getting technical and into the weeds, but our plan and our environmental impact statement has different alternatives to allocate. So how much of that, what it really means is how much of that 4,100 are we going to use over the next 20 years?
Okay.
And so there's a limited amount, and where we hope a lot of those will occur in these more developed, more concentrated areas we're talking about. And we have proposed certain levels of bonus units to incentivize that as well. So that's a long, complicated answer, but
I mean, it sounds like I think I understand like that you have a development right, and you can transfer it into a town center, relocate it, or or retire it, and then the regional plan will match with like an incentive bonus units. So that way the town center project can then pencil out, can actually be feasible.
Right.
Because I mean, it sounds like in the town centers, those redevelopment projects in town centers, there's so many benefits that come with that whenever they upgrade. It's water quality, they're getting the stormwater done, which nobody's really, it's a big problem in our urban developed areas, storm water coming off of properties. But then you get the walkability, you get the scenic improvements. And I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that a lot of our town centers aren't really relevant to today's economy and the resort, destination market. I mean,
that's right.
So it sounds like it's pretty interesting, pretty amazing. But I mean, I've heard you say a couple of times that this is the kind of innovative planning that can actually put Tahoe back on the map as we were back about 25 years ago.
It is, and what is really interesting is we on the California side, the state of California has what's called a Strategic Growth Council, and they provide grants for people who are doing planning and development that's more sustainable as models. And we received a first round grant and showed them the idea of changing the development footprint for environmental gain, and then redeveloping these town centers for even more environmental gain. And the idea that TRPA can change the footprint, and then also working with local governments, change the character where that development footprint is, that development is transferred to, reducing trips and greenhouse gas emissions, all of those things, they looked at and said, wow, you guys could be a model for the rest of the state.
Wow, that's amazing.
And gave us another grant to continue that work, and we're using a lot of it to help the local governments do their plans, but we're also using it to help facilitate this transfer program.
So, it sounds like there's a lot going on for restoration and kind of town center revitalization, but what does it mean for the average homeowner? Are there any policy updates and changes just for?
Well, some of the things that we heard loud and clear, and this will be, again, nothing that is a newsflash to anybody, is a lot of the little things that TRPA does to individual homeowners cause a lot of problems. Delay, they don't understand it. And so if you go back to the concept of we're trying to protect environmentally sensitive areas, we've gone so far as to say what size your deck can be, and if you put a storage shed in, you have to transfer in coverage from somewhere else.
Under the current plan.
Yeah, so what we've said is, if we can get enough gain from these other things, maybe we can lighten up a little bit on decks and storage sheds and things like that. So we're proposing and evaluating that through the environmental impact process. What can we do there to make it easy on the average homeowner? The other big initiative in the plan, and I've kind of alluded to it a little bit, is working with the local governments. TRPA is a regional agency, and we look at it, if we can set in place this concept of transferring and moving it into town centers and off of environmentally sensitive areas, we don't need to be in the details of what exactly does that particular building look like, or how wide is your sidewalk, is it 12 feet or 8 feet or whatever. The public works departments in the cities and the county who take care of those things, and the cities and the counties who are directly interfacing with the public at the North Shore, say in our offices, or the South Shore, they can do those community plans as long as they fit within the parameters. So we're calling those area plans, which is a new term.
Okay.
And we are encouraging the local governments to do area plans that fit within the regional framework. And if they do an area plan and it fits, it's called conformance review, then we want to do a memorandum of understanding with them, turning over the permitting and planning functions to them. We will look at them every year and kind of give them a report card on how they're doing. But that gets the government closer to the person who elects their city council or county commissioner or county board member, and they can get involved in development decisions, they can get involved in their local area plans, and we can focus on the regional level, which is really what we were created to do.
Okay. But those, I know that a lot of these policies and ideas, that are proposals and they're just draft right now, have received a lot of support. But I mean, there are some critics too. We definitely have some. There's the conservation community who feels like some of the policies may result in unintended consequences. What are some of the checks and balances in the plan? I mean, how does it work?
Sure. Well, first of all of the proposals are going through the environmental impact process. So that's one check and balance.
So like an analysis to find out what their impact would be.
So if we've proposed something and the group, the separate group that's prepared the analysis says, yeah, but that's going to generate some more water pollution or air pollution or more trips or whatever. If you want to stay with that proposal, you need to do something to mitigate that impact. Or at least you should know that that impact is there and propose something. That'll be the public policy debate that goes on with the governing board. So that's the first step, is the environmental impact statements. As I mentioned, once we get the plan in place, we have now committed, and it's in the plan, to do annual monitoring and take that back to the governing board every year. The threshold evaluation we talked about earlier, that's now going to be done every 4 years with monitoring every year. And the governing board is going to look at all of that information coming in once a year and look to us as agency staff and say, given this latest information, we think you should direct your efforts to these things, or maybe make these amendments or whatever.
So, but I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of things built into the plan as far as checking back in, watching what the local governments are doing, and working with them to make sure that the regional plan actually, those goals and those policies and the thresholds are being met by the local plan. I mean, it's the concern that the local jurisdictions will just be off, doing their own thing, and TRPA won't be involved isn't really very accurate.
Right.
But I mean, TRP is still going to be involved in some projects if the proposal were to be approved.
The proposal has, if you're a certain size project, it would come to TRPA. If it's on the shore zone, it would come to TRPA. If it's in the highest density area, which is called the high density
tourist district.
Tourist district, yeah, where the casinos are. So those things would still come to TRPA. We've also had some input already on the draft plan. Some people are saying maybe we need an appeal process. So if a local government does something, approves something, and somebody says, we don't think that's consistent with the plan that TRPA said was okay, they can appeal it to TRPA. We also have the annual, like you were alluding to, the annual review and conformance process. And if we see that they've said we're going to do these things, we're going to track this water quality issue and take care of it as we do each development, and they aren't, then we can say we're pulling back. So there are tons of checks and balances in there.
Okay. So I've heard you talk about restoration and ramping that up. I've heard you talk about permit process streamlining and ramping that up, and also environmental redevelopment of the town centers. But I think I'm trying to get a hold of what would it mean for the average homeowner again? Like, what are some of those policies that we're talking about for homeowners when it comes to coverage and BMPs?
Well, BMPs, for those who don't know, are best management practices.
Thank you. Yeah.
And they are designed so that you take your property and you catch the runoff. Maybe that's you infiltrate it at the edge of the property, or maybe you push your snow off of the driveway into a certain area where it melts and runs into the ground instead of down the street into the lake. All kinds of little things like that. We've got a whole BMP manual. And one of the things that we've found is, in some cases, instead of each property owner doing it on their property, we want to give people an alternative of coming together and saying, well, if we took everything on this street, for example, and did one project, we call that an area-wide, it could be even larger area, we can do an area-wide best management practice project, or whatever it is, and that will meet our water quality standard as well. So we've made it more flexible, alternatives on how you can do best management practices. You still have to meet the same standard. So that's one example. Another example, we talked a little bit about loosening up the requirements on small sheds and decks and things like that, to the degree that we can maintain the same water quality but allow those things, then you as the average homeowner won't have to come to TRPA or your local government to get a permit for some things that you might have had to get a permit for before.
So like a one-stop shop for, I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time, but...
Well, and the one-stop is that when the local government takes over the local planning and permitting, you no longer have to come to TRPA and the local government.
Right.
So you can
it's
go
just
one
because,
place.
Because they're actually implementing the environmental policies for the basin just at the local level.
Exactly.
They've taken it on for themselves.
Exactly. So
that sounds pretty great.
Well, and we're not, I use an analogy, is we're kind of trying to steer the ship at the regional level, but we don't have to make every decision on, how you row the paddle.
Right. Okay.
That's something that the local governments can do, and it's more convenient with the one-stop shop. They're closer to the people. There's a lot of good reasons to do it. So.
Now, when we've talked about environmental redevelopment of town centers, and you mentioned the high-density tourist district, that casino core on the South Shore, there are different heights of buildings that are being proposed to be allowed, in certain cases in the regional plan. And I know that that's one of the areas that we've heard of both support and concern about from the two sides. Why, can you just talk a little bit about what those heights are and how they work?
Well, there's three kinds of centers that are proposed. One is called a town center, and there are a number of those around the lake. There's one called the regional center, which is the area of the city of South Lake Tahoe, basically along 50 from state line moving west. And the town centers have a maximum of 4 stories. The regional center has 6, and then there's one high-density tourist district, which is the casino core, and that has a maximum of 197.
Okay.
You can't just automatically get the 197 or the 6 stories or the 4 stories. You have to deal with water quality, you have to meet the scenic standards and so forth. And you don't have to build the 4 stories or 6 stories or 197 feet. That's just the maximum. So we've heard people say, well, gee, we like the Main Street concept where it's walkable and everything, but it's not 4 stories. It's maybe 2. Fine. If that's what working with your county or city you decide you want to do, and that's what they want to bring to us, that's fine, as long as it's within that envelope. You can't go above the envelope without us looking at the regional plan again and saying what's the trade-offs we have to make for environmental gain and so forth.
But those heights are really integral to getting the environmental improvements that are needed in the town centers, and also the making room for the restored land uses from the outlying areas, from the meadows and everything. So I can definitely understand how that works. But there's there's ways that you can design buildings, isn't it, where it doesn't look necessarily like a 4-story building from the street.
Yeah, well, again, it doesn't have to be 4 stories to get the.
Okay.
It could be less to get the mixed use and walkability and water quality benefits. But you're right. You can vary the facades. You can vary the roof line. You can step things back. You can have openings that go through the buildings. You can do a lot of things so that it doesn't just look like a big wall or a big block, and you can make it very interesting. We've got some redevelopment projects that have already happened, for example, in the Heavenly area, Heavenly Gondola area. Yeah. People can see that, and it can be less intense than that. And we can have open spaces interspersed throughout there. So you can create, I would argue, some spaces that are much nicer than spaces we have at the lake now.
Okay.
And and at the same time, getting environmental improvement and re-stimulating or modernizing our economy.
So because that one-story sprawl development that Todd was built on back in the 50s and 60s, I mean, that's really where a lot of the problems come from. But it seems like that's where a lot of the opportunities are to kind of
move that,
make it more compact. You can fit it into a smaller, tighter spot by stacking it up, and you get more open space. There's a lot of projects that we've got up there that have shown that.
But again, like we talked about earlier, there's only 4,100 units plus 600 bonus units, depending on which alternative. But let's just say use that 4,700 number. There's only 4,700 units you're moving, so it's not like you're going to make 6 stories, 4 stories, and 197 feet everywhere you can. There's not that many units.
Right.
So it's while those are the capacities that we've allowed in those areas, there's not really that development.
Speaking of that kind of growth potential, what would these policies, I mean, they're not really about adding more people or units to the basin. It's more about doing better with what we have.
Right.
How many people would actually be added to the basin?
Well,
do you know?
I think a lot of people may not realize that we've actually lost population.
Okay.
So a lot of these new units would just get us back to where we are. I think if you went 20 years out, the highest projection, we might add 5,000 people.
Okay.
Which is not very
out
many.
of 60,000 population. I mean, it's a very small percentage of increase. Because I mean, a lot of places that are growing or relying on growth are more around, 3 to 10% a year in growth. And
we're less than 1% per year.
Because we're I mean, Tahoe's kind of locked in a lot of ways, and transportation-wise, the road network can't actually get any bigger. We can't expand the roads.
Correct.
But the regional transportation plan, is that part of this?
The regional transportation plan is one chapter
Okay.
of the updated regional plan. Now it goes, TRPA has really 3 hats they wear in the transportation area. Besides being the transportation chapter of the regional plan, which is under the compact, we are also what's called the Regional Transportation Planning Agency for California, for that part of the basin that's in California. We are also the federally designated Metropolitan Planning Organization, which means for federal funding, we're the agency that looks at that. Again, we're unique because we're not expanding capacity. We're figuring out how to rearrange things to make them work better. So what we might talk about if we want to get people around more is bike trails, waterborne transit, things like that. But we're also on the demand side saying, let's move these units that are spread out in these environmentally sensitive areas, let's move them into these town centers, and then we can reduce trips. So we think we can accommodate the growth and reduce and the change and still reduce per capita the greenhouse gas emissions. So we're very proud of some of the sustainability aspects of this plan.
So what's the plan process this year? I know that there's the environmental impact statements are out now, but there's more going on this year, right?
That's right. There are, for the next, for May and June, a 60-day period, you can provide comments on the environmental impact statement. We and our consultants will then take those comments, and then we're going to work through responses to those for the 3 months after that. So that'll be July, August, and September. During July, August, and September, we will also be having governing board workshops to talk about those issues and what we've heard and some solutions. And then the governing board will pick among alternatives based on what we've heard through the environmental impact statement process and just general feedback on the plan. And then working through those 3 months of workshops, we hope to then have a plan that takes the best information from the EIS process as well as the best public input and create a plan that then can get adopted. And by the way, during the EIS process, we will be having workshops and public hearings as well.
Good, perfect. Well, thank you very much, John. I appreciate it. We're out of time. But really, this plan has a lot of opportunities for everyone to get involved, and TRPA is just encouraging everyone to find out a little bit about it. TRPA.org is the website. There are 5 fact sheets that you can read very quickly to just get your feet wet on the plan, get to understand what issues are important to you and what kind of comments you want to provide to our board, and you can find out more there. So TRPA.org, and for Nevada Trails, Jeff Cowan at TRPA signing off.